by
Go Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome to another episode of The Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and today is September 13th, 2011, and this is episode 525. More about this program and the guests that have provided us with such fascinating conversations can be found on our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. The Dawn of Shades always tries to bring interesting people right to the audience to hear about both new and old ideas. We focus on the people, places, and ideas that don't always get to make the mainstream news, whether it's paranormal, alternative, or just plain fun. I also want to let everyone know that we're going to be featuring a new series debuting on November 15th, featuring some of the musicians that make America's music. So don't miss that. It's surely going to be a fascinating look at a variety of genres of music and the people behind it. To get started on the program tonight, I would like to send out a very special birthday wish to Spring in Ocean Springs. I hope you had a fantastic day today, and it's the beginning to a fantastic year. Now, for the show tonight, if you would like to have a question asked, you can email me at gscott@exoticnetwork.com or send it through the virtual auditorium on Paltalk by text. I do monitor the email during the program, so if you're listening outside of the virtual auditorium and would like to have a question answered, go ahead and email it to me, and I'll ask the question for you. In the virtual auditorium, just put it in text. I'll try and catch it as the screen scrolls. First time. Feel free to. Now, for those of you who would like to see you connected, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter, so you can link to me there. There's also a Dawn of Shades fan page on Facebook, so you can look for that too. For the cyclist readers, campers and foodies, articles and blogs, I'm sure you're going to find some material which just might interest you. Now, tonight's guest has written 1,000.
I certainly would, and Jim, thank you for having me on the program. I certainly appreciate it. Well, my name's Jim Harold. I'm the author of Jim Harold's Campfire Truth Ghost Stories. And really, the book was an outgrowth of a series of podcasts I do. And among the different podcasts that I do, there's one called Jim Harold's Campfire. So the book is something like 70.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You know, as a camper myself, I have to admit I rarely indulge in the ghost story around the campfire routine. because most of the time it's old fogies like me that are camping. We don't have a lot of kids to scare.
Oh.
We do talk about the strange and weird things a lot of times around the campfire, too. And definitely these stories would fall into it. And they're all kind of written as standalone stories, you know, so that you don't have to read the whole book for it to make sense. You know, you can start off with just a single chapter, and it makes for a great story. You know, how many years did it take you to collect these books, or collect these stories?
Well, actually, I've been podcasting for about 6 years, but really the campfire's only been going on for about 2.5, and really these were gleaned probably for something of our first 20 shows, and, you know, altogether probably at JimHarold.com, HAROLD. I have about probably between 350 and 400 shows archived there, but really these were only gleaned out of maybe 20 shows, so actually I'm joking, if this book is a success, we're up to, I think, number 82 on Campfire. I think that we'll have enough for a book, at least a book 2 and 3. So, you know, what we basically do is we have what I like to call an electronic, also an international campfire. We have people all over the world that call in, and they share the strange and spooky things that happen to us. And we have several stories every week, so we were able to put this together fairly quickly, and thank you for that nice compliment about the fact that it's bite-sized. Basically what I wanted to do is take those stories as they were told to me and edit them with a light hand so as not to change the meaning or the tone of it. So every story is a little different because it's not really in my voice, it's in the voice of a listener telling and sharing their story. And like I said, 73 different stories. It's a light read, but some real spooky stuff in there. So it was just tremendous fun compiling.
Yeah, you know, earlier before the program started, I had someone ask me, "Oh, is it a scary show?" I said, "No, it's not really scary so much as the stories sound real. You know, they aren't sensationalized and Hollywoodized until they're really, really scary, and you know there's no way." You know, I can remember the big scary story when I was a kid, the one that would just practically have me crawling under my bed, you know, a pillow over my head, was the story of the man with the golden arm. I don't remember what television show it came on, but my siblings and my mother knew, if you want to make me disappear, all you had to do was start telling that story. I really hated that story.
Gee, I think we all have those stories growing up, and the thing that got me, one of the things I thought was really cool, and I see this not only in the book but on my shows, is that some of the spookiest stories are the ones that are told about something that happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago to somebody. Maybe this person's in middle age now. Something happened to them when they were 10, and it stuck with them. And a big part of the book is authenticity. I mean, I believe the people that told these stories, and a few of the stories are actually my personal stories and a couple from my family. These are people who really believe the stories because they have nothing really to gain by making something up, and you could tell in their voice that it was very legitimate and sincere. But there are some spooky stories in there. I think the spookiest story is one about and I'm not going to spoil it, but a teenage girl who plays with a Ouija board and gets a lot more than she bargains for. Another one of my favorite stories is there's a story about, and this one I'll tell a little bit about, a woman who was at the hospital in Great Britain. As I said, this book has stories from the United Kingdom, Australia, Norway, Canada, the United States, every part of the United States. And the story basically was, and it was told by this woman's son-in-law, that his mother-in-law, who was getting on in years and not in the best of health, would have to go to the hospital occasionally, was in the hospital. And this was relatively recent, and probably in the last 10 years. And this nurse kept coming to her asking if she wanted tea. But the nurse was dressed in old-time nurse garb. You know, the old hat, you know, probably, you know, kind of what a nurse would have dressed in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s. Not kind of the scrubs now, but the old-fashioned nurse uniforms. And she just thought it was very strange because nobody else was dressed like that, none of the rest of the staff. And she had occasion later on to ask a staff member, do you have anybody that dresses like this? And she said, oh, no, we don't have anybody on the current staff that dresses like this, but you must have met Flo. And she said, well, who's Flo? Well, that's our resident ghost. So there's some really cool stories in there, and again, I think there's premonition stories, there's UFO stories, there's a little bit of cryptozoology in there, premonitions, dreams. They all have the ring of truth to me, and that's why I think it was great that New Page decided to call it True Ghost Stories, because I believe they're true.
Well, I have a few of my own ghost stories. Probably, I have two that I can think of that were really, really scary. They don't really make great stories. The one, I was standing in the kitchen. I was about 13, 14 years old, and it was late at night. Everybody else had gone to bed, and I was doing this. Feel somebody looking at me. And you know how you feel, somebody looking at you. I turned around, and across the kitchen from me stood a man and a black dog. Now, I knew by looking at them they hadn't come through a door, all right? But they looked pretty solid. And I remember staring at them. A lot of times ghosts don't seem to be aware of people. And even at that age, I knew that. I'm sidling along, and for some reason, because I had to go in front of the refrigerator and the stove and actually get closer to them before I could escape the room. And I'm sidling along with my hand behind me on the furniture, like I needed to have a firm grip on something physical or they were going to get me. I don't know what the deal with that was. And I remember sidling along, keeping my eye on them, and they watched me. They never moved, but they watched me. And when I got to the door, I ran like crazy upstairs. Dishes didn't get finished. I didn't care what anybody said. I just wasn't going to do it. I wasn't staying down there. And, it terrified me, And now that house had numerous other incidents, but that was the one where I clearly saw something that was not there, really. And another one, this one's fairly recent. I was out, this is now maybe 15 years ago. I was out with some friends of mine, a guy named Bruce and a girl named Amy. Now, Amy and I were always playing practical jokes on Bruce, kind of tormenting. He had a really big crush on Amy. And we were kind of mean, okay, like, people can be sometimes. Anyhow, we were in the car, and Bruce was riding in the middle, and all of a sudden, I just turned off on a random dirt road, probably 8-10 miles from town. We were on our way home. This is in the wee hours of the morning. The sun is just coming up. It's in early spring. We're in Minnesota. This is about the most desolate place you could possibly be in early spring. And it's kind of warm for the first time, We've been out all night. And there's an abandoned farmstead there, but there's no buildings anymore. It's just a few trees and a little patch of grass and this little bitty creek. And I had stopped right there by where those trees and stuff were. Now, there's no houses. There's nothing. As far as you can see around you, you can see there is nothing but empty fields. There's just this patch of grass and there's these couple of trees. And I stopped the car, and our windows were down because, like I said, it was the first warm spring day. And even though it's, pre-dawn, just barely daylight where you can just see pretty good. And I put the keys in my pocket. And we hadn't planned this, so we don't really know what we're going to do. We just know we're going to do something mean that Bruce will probably make them think we're going to leave them out here or something. And as we're sitting there, I hear a voice go, Amy. Ooh. And I looked at me, and she looked at me, and I said, did you hear that? And she's, like frozen. Her eyes are like pancakes on her head, And she just stared at me, and then we hear it a little bit closer. Amy. The hair on the back of my neck standing up now, just thinking about it. Wow. And she started screaming. I'm trying to dig the keys out of my pocket and get them back in the ignition. We had electric windows on this car. We could roll the windows. And then just get out of there. And I don't know what happened. I don't know what was going on. I know we never played another practical joke on Bruce, ever.
I don't blame you.
I don't think he had anything to do with it. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was. But I know I distinctly heard twice from outside that car that voice go, Amy. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a story, and this one's not in the book, but in my book. I had a story where a caller, and this is one of my favorite all-time stories on the show, is he was meeting up with some friends to go to a comedy club, and he was driving over to pick them up, and his friends up, and he pulled in their driveway. It was nighttime. He has headlights on. So anyway, the wife of there was a husband and wife. The husband was in the front of the house, I think, and the wife in the back, and they both kind of looked out the window when he came. And he came in, and the one, I can't remember if it was a husband or wife, said, "Hey, are you going to invite those other people in? They're in your car." And then the spouse says, "Yeah, aren't you going to invite them in?" And he's like, "Well, there's nobody in there." And he said, "Oh, no, there's somebody in there. There's a blonde woman in your front passenger seat and a man in a blue shirt in your back seat." And there supposedly wasn't anybody in this car, and they both independently said, "Oh, yes, there is somebody in your car." Those are the kind of stories that they're short, they're simple, but I mean they're pretty wild, and we have a bunch of these type of stories in the book. And the thing that gets me is that I think sometimes when it's just kind of like that, it's very matter of fact. It has a great ring of truth to me that this happened to these folks. Now the question is, what is this? Is this some kind of spiritual tape recording? Or is it actually a manifestation on the other side? Or to my dad tonight, because he has a couple of stories in the book that happened to him that I've heard about my whole life, and you probably remember those when you read the book. And he said, I got to thinking about maybe that ghost I saw, maybe it was a demon. And maybe it is, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the fun of this. When I started podcasting 6 years ago, I remember thinking this. I'd started podcasting because I'd gone to school for broadcasting and was frustrated because I never really did anything with it. I worked on the business side of media, not in front of the camera or the mic, and I was always PO'd about that. And started podcasting and said, what am I going to do a podcast about? And I said, well, I'm going to start with something that really interests me and has my whole life. That way I'll stay interested. And it was the paranormal. I've always been fascinated. When I was a kid, I used to watch In Search Of, that old show with Leonard Nimoy, if you and your listeners remember that one. And the thing is that to me, I thought at that time, this will be great. I'll do this for 6 months. I'll have this whole paranormal thing figured out. And the truth is now, 6 years on, several hundred shows later, I have way more questions than when I started.
Yep. I always tell people when I was young, I wanted to someday be a wise woman. And as time's gone on, the whole question and answer thing, I've gotten pretty good at the questions. I just need to work some more on the answer part, I guess. But I often look back and I wish I was as smart as I was, when I was in my teens and I knew everything.
Well, the other thing is, I think sometimes wisdom is knowing that we don't know. That, realizing our limitations is not thinking that we know everything.
Yeah. And I've had a number of paranormal experiences in my own life. In fact, my mother shocked me. We were having dinner in a haunted hotel, and we were going to tour the hotel before we had dinner. And, if you're ever in Winslow, Arizona, go to the La Posada. It's the last Harvey house that was ever built. And it is cool to visit. Anyhow, we were having dinner there, and we were touring the place first, and my mother told everybody in the group, oh, she's here with us. She's a ghost magnet. If there's a ghost here, they'll come out. I was like, whoa, when did that come in? I haven't exactly been a ghost magnet. But according to her, there was always a number of things that happened, and they usually happened when I was around. And right. I was like, well, I don't, I remember when my mother played with the Ouija board, she won't touch one now. But afterwards, our house was haunted by old Mary Gibson. We knew who she was even. She manifested herself in dreams in a woman who lived across town, and then met my mother through somebody else who says, oh, you're the lady I've been dreaming about. Old Mary Gibson told you to fasten the chain across the top of the stairs. Well, my dad had changed the locks I don't know how many times. We kept having trouble. The basement door would be closed, I think it was, and the light would be left on, and the chain would be hooked. And he kept changing locks, and it kept happening. And Mary Gibson had died in the house as a result of a fall. She died of complications from breaking her hip when she fell down the stairs into the basement. Ooh. And once we started hooking the chain, all these stuff stopped. But my mother still will not touch a Ouija board. She will have nothing to do with one because it all started after that. It's funny.
I mean, again, we have a story in the book about a Ouija board. The one I call the spookiest story in the book because it was pretty wild what happened. But it's funny you mention this because I was literally just talking on another program I was being interviewed on about this very thing. I think in my youth I played around Ouija board once or twice, once for sure, maybe twice. And after all of the stories I've heard stories of people having Ouija boards that wouldn't burn and other things, and stories like yours where folks have opened up manifestations in their home. They've opened a portal of some type. I don't mess with them because I think that, best case scenario, there's nothing to it. Worst case scenario, you're playing a very dangerous game with opening some kind of portal to let something in. And then it's kind of like, to me, it's like leaving your doors unlocked and leaving your house for 2 weeks. Maybe nobody will come in, but why take the chance?
Yeah, that's what my mother says. Pretty much it's a case of she thinks it opens something, and if you don't know what you're doing, you can leave yourself in a world of hurt. They're essentially an unlocked door. But at the same time, I interviewed a pair of sisters who had a book channeled through a Ouija board with friends.
I believe that's possible.
Pardon?
I said I believe that's possible.
I read the book. The book was very good. It wasn't a novel. It was about essentially, changing your consciousness, if I remember correctly. But it wasn't a very good book. It was just a case that it was unusual and that had been channeled.
Well, I mean, if you think about things like Edgar Cayce and automatic writing and those kind of things, I think that things, with or without it, I think things channel through us in a certain extent. For example, when I write, in this particular book, I mean, mainly my job, I wrote a few stories myself that were my own experience, but mainly I was a compiler and an editor of other stories. But when I do write at some length, sometimes you wonder, where did that come from? and who knows if that's God or some type of spirit or what it is, but I'm sure you've had that experience too. You sit down to write something, and then 3, 4, 5, 10 pages later, you have the page and you have no idea where it came from. You may have had some vague idea, but it just came out on the page fully formed. And I believe that we're all vessels for something. It's just trying to figure out what that something is, and I think that it can be for the good, and I think it can be sometimes for the other side, too.
Yeah, and I've heard of novels and stuff being channeled before, too, especially in terms of historical novels. But this was the first time I'd had this type of book sent to me in terms of a channeled book. And at the same part of me imagines the slow progression, letter by letter, of that little thingamajig, whatever they call it. And I'm like, that took a long time. And then to me, I'm thinking, that took a long time. That was a laborious writing.
Yep. Yeah, it certainly would be. I'm glad I didn't have to do this book with a Ouija board.
Yeah, me too. Now, I do have some questions coming in from the virtual auditorium. One question is whether or not you're aware of the Golden Lamb in Lebanon, Ohio.
No, I'm actually from Ohio. I am not aware of those, and that's. I apologize for not knowing about that. I'd love to know more about that. If the listener wants to send me an email, I'm Jim at jimharold.com. It's JimHarold.com to to let me know a little bit about that. Actually, I bet I know who would know about that is John Kachuba. He's the editor of the American Haunted Road Trip series. He has a new book coming out. Just interviewed him a few days ago, and he's an expert on hauntings in the state of Ohio. And I bet that he would know exactly what that's about. And, we have some great states that are very diverse and have a lot of different things about them. I think about Pennsylvania, you have some very rural areas and then some very urban areas. And then you have a state like Ohio, same thing, lots of urban areas, but also a lot of rural area, and very ripe for haunting. And the thing that I find interesting when you get into hauntings is this idea of where there's a lot of emotion. Prisons, for example, old haunted prisons. One of my guests, Tom Ogden, has done books about haunted theaters. And that's another thing that's fascinating to me, this idea that theaters can be haunted, particularly ones where people were doing live acting on stage because they were pouring their hearts out on the stage. There was a ton of emotion. So there seems to be, at least from what I've been able to glean from my research and talking to experts in the field, you've got a place with a lot of emotion, you're more likely to have a haunting.
Actually, if you look on the Exogeny Network website, there's a picture from LaShalle, who's another radio host. She's been a guest many times on my program, that she took in the Birdcage Theater in Tombstone, Arizona. And it shows a woman sitting on a trapeze, fairly clearly. There's also another picture, or actually I think there's two pictures that we took at the Myrtles Plantation. And when we went up there and toured the Myrtles, now, I had done my research before we went there, so I knew that the story that is popularized about the Myrtles and the whole ghost thing is BS. It never happened that way. The kids that were supposedly poisoned lived to become adults and died someplace else, so did their mother. There was never a slave by that name. I think Chloe was their name. But there was never a slave by that name owned by that man on that particular plantation. So the story didn't pan out. The story seemed to have originated in the 50s, and it was done when it became a bed and breakfast. So, we took the haunted tour, and it was kind of disappointing, I guess, in a way. But, I really am into history, so I did find it rather enjoyable. The only thing I could say about the place was, when you went into the dining room, it was like you walked into a room that had just had an argument. I just wanted to leave.
A heavy type.
So there was a distinct, thick atmosphere, and I just wanted to get out of there. I was like, I've seen all I want to see. I want to go. Because you were real limited on what you got to tour. You only toured like 3 or 4 rooms on the ground floor. That was it. And it was kind of like, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have bothered. But anyhow, afterwards we're wandering around outside, and I snapped a couple of pictures as we were preparing to leave, and I was walking back to the back of the plantation house and then to the parking lot. And a girl that had done the tour with us and had been walking with us, she'd had trouble with it. She had a brand new, very expensive digital camera, and it was just malfunctioning. And so we'd talked back and forth for a little bit about her camera malfunctioning, and she couldn't understand why. And then all of a sudden it started to work again. And I wish I had gotten her name and address, because I would love to see, because she was standing beside me, and we both took pictures through the same time period, to see if she caught the same things I did. Because I got one picture that shows either a pregnant or very fat woman walking in front of there, and a very small person standing beside one of the rocking chairs. Those two people weren't there. Where that fat or pregnant woman was walking was impossible to actually walk because of the trees and shrubbery there. You couldn't actually walk there. And I'd taken pictures earlier in the day, so, we did a lot of comparison and everything later, because I hadn't seen it at the time I'd taken the pictures. I need reading glasses. That's a little bitty screen on the LCD. I couldn't see those people.
Right. No,
I hadn't seen them until the next day.
Well, you were talking about theaters. We actually have a theater story in the book. We have a gentleman, and this is another example a gentleman who was a sound engineer up in Canada, I believe, and he had been summoned to do a job for this theater. And the gentleman who took him there was afraid to almost take him into the place. He was acting really strangely. And then this gentleman went in to do this sound job, and all these crazy things started happening. And it's all in the book, all the weird things, tools.
I remember reading that story, the hammer and the drill.
Exactly. And then, you know, after he was done, one of the people at the theater said, did you notice anything weird while you were in there? And he's like, well, now that you mention it. And it turned out that is a haunted, well-known haunted theater. And again, these are people, and the thing I love about our show and I love about the book, and nothing against ghost hunters. I mean, and in fact, that's something that I don't think I want to become a ghost hunter, but I would like to go on some ghost hunts. So if anybody's listening in the Northeast area, let me know, and I'd be interested in tagging along, because that's a part of my research I've really not gotten into, are actual ghost hunts. I'd like to know more. Not interested in becoming one, but maybe going on some to tag along. But what's interesting to me in this book, in all my shows, are people who encounter the supernatural when they're not looking for it. They're just going about their everyday life, and something crazy happens. One of the stories in the book...
That's usually when it happens. Like, when I took those pictures at the Myrtles, I didn't expect anything other than the building there.
Yeah, I agree.
And I did not expect it.
And I think, and that's the... And we can talk about skeptics later a little bit if you want to, but I mean, I've interviewed some pretty heavy-duty skeptics, including Michael Shermer, who is right now, you know, probably along with James Randi, the foremost skeptic out there. And he was very kind and very nice and gracious. I mean, he wasn't insulting or anything. But the thing is that I think sometimes there's this feeling that the paranormal can be measured in a test tube, and it can be weighed on a scale. And I'm not convinced that that's valid. I've had guests in the past, I think Lawrence LaShawn was a guest that we had on, who said that, you know, the study of paranormal has to happen in the field. And I think when you go looking for it, sometimes it can be elusive. I think it's something that tends to happen to you. I'll share, if we've got a moment, I don't know if we're up against a break or something, but if we've got a moment, our story that I had in the book.
Sure, go ahead. Quite a while to break time.
Okay. Well, and this is a very simple story. I have a couple of stories in there that happened to me, but this is one that's, let's put it this way. If this had gone another way, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I had gone, there's a couple stories in there like that, but one was I had gone down south to visit with some family, and I was a teenager at the time, probably about 16, 17, and there was this young lady who had seen me around town, and, you know, at that point, I guess I was pretty cute. Got over it fast, but kind of let it be known that she liked what she saw. So we went on a very nice and very innocent walk, and it was, you know, it was a little town, a little rural town, so not a big city. And you know, there was one lane, those real small roads, not even the ones that have the stripes, but the real small blacktop roads. There was a logging truck parked next to the side. And she and I were just talking about stuff, about her school, about my school, you know, just stuff. And we came upon this log truck, and she walked on one side of it, and I walked on the other. I was on, I believe, the right side. She was on the left. And something told me, you know, Jim, you get away from this truck. I don't know what told me that. I probably went 10 or 15 feet down the road with her. We passed the truck. No issue. And then I heard this big rumble behind me. I turned around. Single one of those logs had fallen off the truck. And not only had they fallen off the truck, they had fallen off on the truck on the side where I was walking. Now, if I had been there and that had happened, I almost certainly would have been killed. So, and we're talking 20, 30 seconds. Something told me to get away from that truck. And then other things have happened, and a really wild one about a drive-by shooting that I narrowly missed is in the book. I believe something or somebody or someone told me to get away from that truck. I don't know who it was. Guardian angel, God, departed loved ones, I don't know. But something told me to get away from it. Because, I remember. It's not something like, I had a distinct feeling to get away from that truck. Distinct.
Uh-huh. Well, I've heard from other people. In fact, in my own family, there's a story relatively recently. This is a story probably 15 years old. My grandparents they were going to go to town and go to the post office and run some errands and then go visit some relatives and so forth and so on. Well, they go into town, they do some of the things, and she was going to go to the post office on the way to the relative's house, and she'd forgotten some of the mail. And they were passing by their home, and she thought, well, I could just turn in and go get it. Excuse me. And then she had a voice that told her, no, don't go home. And so she didn't. Well, to make a long story short, they were robbed that day, and the thieves were probably at the house then. And among the things taken was a gun.
Ah.
They, as senior citizens, they would have probably been.
Yep, probably. And the thing to me now, here's where I think it gets tough. We had a similar call from a caller a couple of weeks ago who said that he felt that he had been spared. And I do believe that happens. But the question I had, and I still have this question, if we are somehow prevented from something happening to us, what about the flip side of the coin? What if I had not been warned somehow of these logs, and the logs would have fallen off and killed me? Is it also true, just the way that something got me out of that situation, if I had been killed, something had put me in it? When a tragedy does happen, when, a 9/11 does happen, and I'm not saying that, it's a horrible thing, but I'm saying the people that were spared, if God or a spirit or whatever delivered them, by the other flip, was it the other people's time to go when they went? And again, don't get me wrong, that's a horrible, terrible thing that happened on 9/11. I'm not suggesting it was meant to be, but, you could take any example. You could take an example of a car crash if somebody dies tragically. Is there such a thing as a time to go and a time not to go when they're spared? Again, it's like you. I think I'm pretty good with the questions. Not so great with the not so great with the answers.
Well, I do know now. I don't know if this is an urban legend or not. That planes that crashed, that end up crashing, have a higher than normal rate of no-shows.
Interesting.
And that the Twin Towers, the day that they fell,
on
9/11, had a higher rate of absenteeism than normal.
Yep.
More people stayed home.
Many stories. There's many stories of people who, I could think the one story I think was the gentleman that ran Kenneth Fitzgerald, which was at the very top of the building, and everybody in the company, I think, was killed except for him. And the only reason he wasn't there that day was it was his son's first day of kindergarten. And he went there. So was something saying, it's not his time. It's not his time to go. He still has a purpose. I tend to believe that. I do believe there's something saying, it's not your time yet. But it does beg the other side of the question. And that's why I love about doing my show and doing the book. We get into everything. We get into UFOs. We get into ghosts. We get into cryptozoology. I have a story in there about a guy who I believe he became a West Point cadet and teaching at West Point, and told the story of when he was a teenager seeing something with red eyes in the woods. Pretty credible guy with nothing to gain by coming on my show and making that claim. So these are the things that fascinate me.
One of the stories that I collect, okay, as someone who also delves in this, you can understand the concept of collecting stories, is stories of what I call the black thing. Now, the black thing is vaguely humanoid. The stories have a lot of consistency. They can have happened. I've talked to people that have had them in Australia, New Zealand, North and South America, Europe. I haven't talked to anybody in Asia that's had it. And it's always 2 or more people, and it doesn't matter what mode of transportation, whether they're on foot, bicycle, horseback, motorcycle, or motor vehicle. It always just almost catches them. And it also happens in an area that's known for UFO-type activity. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it chases them, and in my own case, when it happened, I didn't tell anybody. I was so embarrassed. I just didn't tell anybody about it. And it wasn't until about 8 or someone else was telling the story, and I went, whoa, that happened to me. But his story happened in Mississippi, and my story happened in Arizona.
Ooh.
So,
yeah,
he'd never heard me tell the story because I'd never told it. And essentially, this black humanoid figure appeared behind us. I was with my first husband at the time. We're traveling in a Jeep down a dirt road. And it's chasing us. Now, the thought that's running over and over in my head like a broken record was if it catches us, it's a fate worse than death. And I was in a blind panic. First of all, that thought isn't consistent with my belief system. Secondly, blind panic over something chasing us is it was an unreal fear. It wasn't a normal kind of fear I would feel. And that's true also of other people, that they say that the fear is weird. It's not like a normal fear. And I get the general feeling that the fear comes from the thing, whatever it is, for whatever reason. That it induces the fear somehow, whether, beaming microwaves at my head or whatever. And I was yelling at him to drive faster, out of character for me, because, we were going at speeds that I would have normally been having a cow about. And then when we got to the point where we had to slow down, or we were going to, in fact, wreck, and we're almost home, we're out of the area, it just disappeared.
Huh.
What was it? I don't know. It looked the closest thing I've ever seen in any Hollywood representation is in the movie Ghost. Those black things that came to get the bad people?
Yep.
Like that. Except it was a little denser, and it was, loping along behind us. No matter how fast we went, it didn't seem to have to run any faster.
Well, you said kind of shadowy figures. It reminded me, one of my favorite, I don't know if you call it urban legends or phenomena that's out there. It's not in this book, but I've talked about it. And again, I have more than one podcast. I have Jim Harold's Campfire. I have Paranormal Podcast. That's more of an interview show with authors and experts. Then I have a third paranormal theme show called The Paranormal Report, and that's with Clayton Morse. He's on Fox News Channel. He's the co-host of Fox and Friends, but he also happens to love the paranormal, and we do that weekly video show as an update on weekly news. Anyhow, one phenomena that we talked about in the Paranormal Podcast, several times I've had the honor of having Brad Steiger, the great legendary author, on my program. And one thing that we talked about, because I know Brad knows a lot about everything to do with the paranormal, is this phenomenon of black-eyed kids. Now, I'm assuming are you familiar with that one? Have you heard about that one?
The black-eyed kids I have heard about, but that sounds more like an urban legend. I haven't heard any first-hand or credible second-hand reports.
Yeah. Well, it has been reported. I don't know if it's credible or not. I've been trying to see if I can find somebody that's done a whole book on it, because it is fascinating. The whole idea that these kids will knock on your door and they will ask you, can I come in to get a drink of water? Can I come in to use the phone? I've hurt myself. Can you help me? Anything to get inside the house, and then they say that they won't leave, and they have these dark circles around their eyes, or these dark eyes. And I've always found that fascinating. Now, again, it could fall under the area of urban legend, but it's particularly mysterious.
But, okay, I'll tell you, I was doing a series of interviews on military abductions or re-abductions of alien abductions. And I'd interviewed this particular woman. And after the program was done, and just like this, it was a Tuesday night, as always, And, you know, I was doing whatever, piddling around with the computer. I couldn't sleep that night. And in the wee hours of the night, I heard puppies crying outside.
Huh.
Now, I have a very faithful watchdog who adores me, and she's quite intimidating to most people. And I regard her as somewhat intuitive. She's going on 10 now, but she's not senile by a long shot. And she's also pretty wise. You know, it's hard to pull the wool over her eyes.
The wool over her eyes.
Yeah, anyhow, she's laying here beside me, and she doesn't react. Well, if there's real puppies out there, she'd have reacted. Not because she's particularly maternal, but they might be edible, you know, and she didn't move. And this went on for quite some time, and I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. Well, then a bit later, it sounded like we were surrounded by owls, sitting in places where they'd have been, you know, like hovering in midair because there's no tree, surrounded by 30 or 40 owls. Okay, this is weird. All right, 2 weird things in one night. I'm losing my mind, you know. Then it sounded like cars pulling up, and then people getting out and walking around and around and around. I could hear their voices. I could hear the engines. I could hear the sound of the wheels on the dirt. It was very realistic sounding. And I'm like, there's no way, because the dog is still asleep. The car alone would have had her in fits, and you have another dog who goes off at everything. Cars would have definitely gotten one of these dogs' reactions. So these are not real sounds. Either they're only in my head or they're mechanically reproduced, electronically reproduced, because they don't react to like recordings of sounds. And this went on and on and on. Well, okay, I would have thought, okay, you know, you let your imagination go crazy here with you. But when I went to wake up my fiancé, I had a very hard time waking him up, and he was babbling about things that weren't real, too. And, you know, it took a long time to wake him up, and it actually made me, you know, I think probably more uncomfortable that he was in such an unusually deep and odd sleep, having this strange dream, than it did to hear the weird noises outside. I actually did not ever go to sleep that night until after the sun came up and I had walked around outside and I made sure there was really nothing out there. I don't know what it was. You know, when I talked to the person that had been my guest, she said, well, I didn't tell you, but something weird usually happens to anybody who interviews me. They're implying some sort of a, you know, covert government operation or something. And I thought, you know, should I say anything about this? Should I keep quiet about it? I thought, no, you know. So my response was actually, okay, if you're trying to scare me, puppies, wrong thing. I've worked with dogs my whole life. Dogs don't scare me, not even when they're puppies. I'm an avid camper, outdoors person. Owls aren't scary either, not even when there's 20 or 30 of them. Just that's a lot of owls. And as far as people, well, I do a lot of public speaking. I'm really not that afraid of people either. You know, if you want to scare me, let's go for the whole shebang. You know, get a ghost with chains, rattle them. You know, shared fear is much more effective. You know, wake up my neighbors. Because I'm thinking, you know, if my neighbors are awake and they're hearing these ghosts too, yeah, that might get my attention. And if you'll threaten, it would be much easier if you just mail me a letter. You know, then I will understand exactly what it is you want, you know. So anyhow, I haven't had any more weird things. I don't know what it was that night. You know, I can blame it on an active imagination. You know, but I'm really not prone to imagining things, especially a whole series of things. You know, and my imagination's never affected Greg's sleep. Never.
Yeah, I've talked to professors. I've talked to policemen. I do have to tell a story about a policeman. It's hilarious, or I thought it was funny. There was a policeman who listened to my podcast. 5 minutes
before break, so go ahead.
Well, I'll be able to get this in 5 minutes. It's pretty fast. Anyway, a policeman who is an avid listener to my podcasts, and he was listening in his squad car as he was going about his patrol, and they ended up arresting someone. And they put him in the back of the car, and I guess the officer, you know, turned the show back on. I guess he had his iPod plugged up or whatever, had it burned on CD or whatever. A criminal in the back of the car says, "Can you turn that up? That sounds pretty interesting." And I thought that was one of the biggest compliments in 6 years of podcasting that I gotten, that a perp, about ready to go to jail was more concerned about hearing my show. I thought, I've got a new following.
Yeah. It's funny, the things that catch people's attention. I think one of the strangest ones that a friend of mine that listened to a program said, listening to your program was just like talking to you. I thought, oh, gee.
That's the idea.
Talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the idea. And I probably, well, I don't know what you do, but I try not to. I mean, I have ideas of what I'm going to ask, but I never script questions. I just talk. I just have a discussion.
Sometimes have scripted questions, which we all know a lot of authors do. They send you scripted questions. If that's what they expect me to do, I don't do the interview. If I have to stick to that list of 20 questions, no, thank you.
No, I think you should be well enough versed in your subject that you should be able to roll with a normal. Just have a discussion with a friend or a new friend, in this case, you, Gia, and just talk about what it is. And something for me, like the paranormal and like this book and my programs, it's easy for me to blather on for hours at a time because I'm so passionate about it. And I think it's not that I'm important,
well,
but I think
I always tell everybody, listening to the show is just like the guest and I are sitting down in a coffee shop. You all get to eavesdrop, and nobody's going to yell at you. And if you have a question, you have a way to ask it.
There you go.
So it's kind of I guess in a way, it's a pretty intimate look at whoever the guest is.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. It's nice and casual. It's comfortable. It's like wearing a favorite pair of jeans. You don't have to dress up to come talk on the Donna Shades.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole idea is that people be themselves, whoever it is, and we talk about whatever it is that they do.
And we try to do that on the campfire, and I hope that comes through in the book. That what I tried not to do was get real heavy with the editing and try to make them sound the way I would sound. The idea is to get their stories across in their voice. I think we did a pretty good job of that. And again, people from all over the world, and it's just so neat to hear their real stories.
Yeah, and for people who are looking for stories to tell kids and whatnot, these are not gory. These are not stories that are going to give them nightmares, and none of them are as bad as the Golden Arm thing. Okay, or even remember the poem as a kid. I don't remember what it was titled, but there's a refrain in it that goes, "The goblins will get you if you don't watch out." Okay, that was it. I was out of there as a kid. I hated that poem. But now it is time for us to take a break. So, folks, while we're away from your computer, check out our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. Stay tuned, and the Donna Shades will return with our guest, Jim Harold, and more fantastic conversation in just a few minutes. Welcome back to the Donna Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, with our guest, Jim Harold. And once again, I would like to remind everyone to visit our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. You can sign up for the newsletter, wander around and explore the website, and let me know what you think of it. There are links there to take you to blogs, Twitter, and Facebook, too. If you want to go straight to the blog, you can go to giascott.wordpress.com and find out what kinds of things I've been up to lately. Now, our topic tonight is as fascinating as always, and we're fortunate enough to have Jim Harold joining us. So if you would like to ask him a question, please go ahead and email it to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com, and I'll pass it on from there. If you're listening in on a podcast or think of it after the program has finished, you can go ahead and send it to me. I'll do my best to get your questions answered. Now, if you're in the virtual auditorium, just put it in text there, and I'm trying very hard to catch it as the screen scrolls. If you want to call in, our call-in number, once again, is 504-273-7379. Now, Jim, before we get started on our 101 topics we can cover, you want to tell everybody how to find your website and your podcast?
Absolutely. The main place to go is jimharold.com. It's JIMHAROLD.com. And there you'll find my three main podcasts. The Paranormal Podcast, which is kind of the flagship, and that's been around for the longest time, for about 6 years. And I've talked to people like Stanton Friedman, Michael Shermer, as I mentioned before. Brad Steiger's been on quite a few. Lloyd Auerbach, Kathleen Marden, Jeff Belanger's been a guest many times. So we've been Marie D. Jones. We've been very fortunate to kind of have some of the superstars of the paranormal there giving their theories and talking about their books and so forth on that program. That Campfire, which this book is based on that we're talking about tonight. And then we have the Paranormal Report with my good buddy Clayton Morse from Fox News Channel, the big national one. And he's done me the honor of, we co-host a weekly paranormal news show. It's a video show. We look at clips of things like UFOs and ghosts and cryptids, and that's a lot of fun. That's all at jimharold.com. Also, I should mention two other things. Off of that site, you can get to the new show I've been doing, and it's kind of a change of pace one with Kate Botello. If you all remember the old Tech TV with Leo Laporte, she used to co-host Screensavers with Leo, and another national personality, and that I'm honored to work with, and we're doing kind of a News of the Weird, kind of a funny show. And then also, if that wasn't enough, I also have a Plus Club for people who can't get enough, and we're up to a few hundred members on that. I have extra bonus shows for those folks. But you can find everything. Your portal to my stuff is jimharold.com. That's HAROLD. And it's so much fun.
I tell you what, you're one busy man.
6 shows a week.
I know how much time it takes to do one show a week. I cannot imagine getting through that all in 1 week.
I do 6 shows a week, and I say, and I have a family and everything like most folks, and it's just a lot. And I've had great support from my family, and it's turned from a little hobby that I did once a week, and into like this big thing. And I think it's basically going to become my full-time career. It's looking, particularly the book seems like it's going quite well, and already a lot of 5-star reviews on Amazon. I'm very heartened. I think when I checked tonight, they said it was going to take a little longer to get it because they're almost sold out. And I'm sure that more are coming in as we speak. They said it's in stock, but it's going to take a couple extra days. So that's a good sign when it goes 7 less, 6 less, 5 less, and then it says that means that people are buying it. So I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah. Now, folks, if you do want to buy Jim's book, if you just go to our website, click on his name, you will see there on the right-hand side of the page, there's an Amazon ad. You can just go right there and get his book, so it makes it nice and easy. His book's there with the other guests that have appeared here recently on the Donna Shades. Now, you do so many other things, and, I'm sure, as you said, there's books inside your head. We talked on the break a little bit about UFOs. Now, UFOs is a big interest, obviously, on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. So, what kind of UFO things would you be talking about?
Well, we have, quite a few things that we talk about on the shows, and we have some in the book. We have one from Germany, I believe it was. As I said, we have stories from all over. A gentleman who recounts the story when he was a kid. His family lived, I believe it was on a second-floor apartment. And the story is of missing time, of a strange light, of his mother literally disappearing for hours and then coming back. And then also I believe there might have been some physical scarring involved with that. So we certainly delve into this area of UFOs. And UFOs fascinate me because I believe there has to be something to a certain percentage, particularly when you have Leslie Kean. We were fortunate enough to have her in the program. She did that great book, UFOs on the Record, talking about general and so forth, going on the record about UFOs. We have credible witnesses, pilots, saying that they're seeing these things. I am a firm believer that there is something to the phenomena of UFOs. Now, does that mean every UFO video that we see on YouTube is real? Probably not. Probably the vast majority are fake. But there's something to this phenomena that's been going on so long. And the funny thing is, and I'm sure your listeners know this, and I know you're very well aware of it because of your background in UFO research, that these sightings did not start in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold. They've started thousands of years ago and are in places like the Bible. So, strange things in the sky. I mean, now
classic flying saucers are featured in Renaissance paintings.
Yes.
They are on cave walls.
Yes.
They've been chipped into rock. Don't tell me it started in Roswell. No, it didn't.
Exactly. And the thing is that now we have a ready excuse. Now, I don't know if any of your listeners, you had the chance to read the excellent book, Area 51 by Annie Jacobson. A considerable, I believe, or some kind of government experimentation, but not all. For example, that hypersonic jet that just blew to bits that they were trying to experiment with that failed. I mean, there are a lot of things the government's doing, and in that particular plane, what fascinated me was it was almost the perfect UFO triangular shape. It was black, and it was shaped like a triangle. And that's very reminiscent of some of the famous UFO sightings, for example, over Belgium. But to me, a certain percentage falls into that. A certain percentage falls into hoaxes, and then there are credible reports by credible witnesses, and there are other stories in the book about UFOs. So I believe there's something there, and that kind of feeds into my personal general theory of the paranormal. I believe I would be willing to agree with the skeptics 96, 97%. I'd be willing to say, I'll say that 97% of this is either people mistaken, having mental issues, or hoaxing. But I believe there's a percentage, maybe it's single digits, where it can't be explained, and it's certainly something that is something that's out there, and that I think is tied to a lot of things that we don't understand, because I think we as humans tend to overestimate our intelligence. 150 years ago when people were talking about the ether, I'm sure those people thought they were pretty smart too.
Yeah,
but now today's
and when the Earth was flat back then too.
Yeah,
and when the sun rotated around the Earth, we were smart then too.
Exactly, and the thing is we have to know that within any given time we have limitations to our science. Doesn't mean science is bad. Thank goodness for science; it's done so many things. We wouldn't be able to do this program without science. So I'm not anti-science by any stretch whatsoever.
Right.
So.
Well, I know in my own family, I had an uncle that was a cowboy. He was managing a ranch in central Arizona. And he was on his way home from town one day, and he saw what he thought was an Airstream trailer off in a wash, which is a dry riverbed, off the road. And he went home cussing and swearing. It was another stupid snowbird that had gotten that trailer where he couldn't even get his truck. He had to go home and get a horse, and he figured he was going to have to use horses to get this trailer out.
Yeah.
He got back to the site where the trailer was, I believe there were some burn marks on the ground, but that was it. There was no trailer. There were no tracks going in and out, just the tracks where it had been sitting. He didn't even like talking about it. He's deceased now, but he didn't even like to talk about it. He didn't like things that were explainable. He was a science-based guy, And this didn't have an explanation to him. How did somebody get that trailer in and out of there without leaving wheel tracks or tearing up things? He couldn't explain.
Yeah,
and I know in my own case in Arizona, I was coming home with my mother and my son. We'd been out in the forest in the Apache Sitgreaves Forest, the same forest that Travis Walton was abducted from. And we were in the area where they had an old work camp. I don't remember what the name of it is right at the moment. But they'd been shutting down the work camp, and they'd torn down the houses and the school and the store and all that other kind of thing. And we'd been out behind that, and we were coming out. As we're coming up out of the canyon behind it, over the treetops, I saw a brand-new, shiny water tower. Mm-hmm. Now, my mother and I talked about this brand-new, shiny water tower. We're quite amazed because we were tearing down this work camp, not building at it. Now, for some reason, I never looked over as we drove, because we actually drove through the work camp as we were leaving. I never looked over to see this brand-new water tank. Something else caught my attention, apparently. But the next day at work, I worked with a man who had grown up out there at that work camp and had gone to the school that had originally been out there. And I was all excited to tell him about this new water tank out there. And he said, there's no way. It's impossible. They're tearing down that work camp. It's being discontinued. They don't use it anymore. And I was insistent. I knew I'd seen it. My mother knew she'd seen it. My son knew he'd seen it. So obviously my next day's off. Guess where I've got to go again? And guess what? There was no water tank. Now, did I imagine a water tank? Did we have a mass hallucination that we all shared? Did we all suddenly develop some mental illness? I doubt it. I don't know. But something that looked like bright, shiny water tank.
I believe it because one story I share in the book is a story that my dad had. And there are two stories, and they're both featured in the book that I've heard since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And you got to know my dad. My dad, he didn't sleep with, crystals under, he doesn't sleep with crystals under his pillow, or he's not into pyramid power or anything like that. Pretty salt-of-the-earth guy, steel worker, grew up in West Virginia, and came to the city to, like so many people in the 50s, to earn his living and raise a family. And anyhow, he, when I was first born, I guess my grandmother was babysitting me or something, and he and my mom were back in West Virginia visiting, and they went off to this secluded place. Now, I'm not even going to know why they were doing that. I don't want to know. Lover's Lane, I don't know.
All right.
But anyway, they drove up to this spot, which is extremely off the beaten path and secluded. My dad knew it because he grew up there. It was an old trail. You could drive up it, but it was gravel road. It wasn't paved or anything. All of a sudden, in the sky, and I describe this in the book, and you've seen it, he's light. A light so bright he could say, I know what car he had at that time. I believe he had a 1968 Buick LeSabre. I remember that car as a little kid. And he said that lit up for a few seconds. It was so bright that it lit up the whole dashboard. He could read the numbers on the speedometer with the lights off. Then he saw a man in some kind of mask. And then, in his words, he says, well, I decided then I was, at least I don't recall if he used this in the book, but as he tells us, I decided to get the hell out of there. So he started getting out of there, and then my mom didn't see the man with the mask, but she did see the light. They were coming out and said they saw birds, larger than any birds that they'd ever seen in their life, strange-looking birds with huge wingspans. Now, I don't know what that was, and he said he fully expected to hear something on the news the next day that so-and-so happened, there was an explosion or something, but the capper for me was it wasn't just the light. It was some kind of man figure, and then it was these large birds. Now, somebody else would tell me that, and I think, well, they're making it up. I don't believe my dad would make that up because it's not in his nature. And this is a story since I've literally heard my whole life. And there's so many, it's not just my dad, it's other people's dads and other people's relatives that would not tell, crazy stories. And you can tell, and you can kind of, I'm sure you've grown a sense for your different guests, and you could tell when somebody's trying to, quote, snow you, and somebody's playing it straight. And for the vast majority of people I talk to on Campfire, most of them are playing it very straight. They're just very normal people, have had very strange experiences.
I had a very strange experience with a large bird myself. Now, I lived and worked in northern Arizona. Now, I had seen the California condors from the Grand Canyon. On occasion, we would sight them overhead, okay? Because it was a big deal to be able to recognize the condors when they came through. That's the largest bird in North America. Now, I was sort of familiar with how they would fly, and mostly they ride on thermals, is what they seem to do to me. And I was coming home one night, and it was just before dusk, and I was driving down a dirt road. I was coming home from work. That was my preferred route. It was a little slower pace. It was a lot shorter. And, you just kind of could chill out after work if you went home by the dirt road instead of the interstate. So I'm going home on the dirt road, and I noticed this bird flying, probably 15, 20 feet off the ground. And it's very large. To me, it looked like it had a 9 to 12-foot wingspan. That's a little bit bigger than a condor, if I remember correctly. But, in addition, it's also light-colored. Condors aren't light-colored. This was the biggest bird I had ever seen. And it's flying, and I'm kind of like weirded out and thinking, that I'm possibly, imagining things and stuff. You need to hurry up and get home and so forth. So I speed up, and I'm rushing on this dirt road so I could fly. I knew the road very well, and I was flying down it on this in the Jeep. This bird was pacing me at 45 and 50 miles an hour.
Wow.
I don't know any bird that could do that. I don't know what I was seeing that night. It was not yet sundown. The sun was real low, but it wasn't yet sundown. I don't know what I was seeing, but I know that, as far as I was concerned, this bird fell in the high weirdness file that I have in my head.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And, to keep pace with me for 5 miles at that kind of speed, I know some birds, they can do that, when they're diving. They can do it for brief periods of time.
The first thing I think of in my dad's story,
to 20 feet above the ground and not in a straight line pacing a vehicle.
No, you're right. And the first thing I thought of with my dad's story was West Virginia was also and not just a few years before that, a couple of years before that, the whole Mothman, a different part of West Virginia, but the whole Mothman phenomenon that, famous John Keel wrote about so eloquently and did such great work, and also in later day dramatized by the Mothman Prophecies, which was actually a very, very good movie, even though it had been brought up for the modern day. But I thought of Mothman, this idea, and Mothman, the idea of Mothman, there are other winged creatures. There's a tradition in the Latino community called La Chusa, and we've had people talk about La Chusa on Campfire, on the podcast, specifically about this idea of a winged woman who comes down and will take you if you, I guess it's part of the lore that kids are told if they do something wrong, that La Chusa will swoop down and steal them. But there's this folklore about this winged creature.
Yeah, I grew up with the stories of the Yolona, and she haunts the shores of various kinds of canals and rivers and whatnot, and she's going to get you, and she'll scratch an X in your back. I don't know what the X in your back was all about, but, you didn't, especially after sundown, you didn't want to be anywhere near that water. And, as an adult, I kind of poo-pooed all those stories. But living in northern Arizona, I had camped alongside of a reservoir downstream from the dam and everything, and on some of the sandstone ledges. And I spent many, many days there. We swam there regularly and everything. Now, I don't know if something was out there that night or what, but I had worst feelings about that. I never, ever went there again. And about a year or two after I crossed that off my list of places to go and swim, a boy had a near-drowning episode up in the developed area where there were swimming beaches and boat launches and whatnot. And I'm thinking he was like 7, 8 years old. And when he was pulled out of the water and got enough air to talk and everything, he told everyone there was a lady under the water who tried to keep him there.
Oh, my.
Now, the Opis in that area have a story about a female winged serpent, or feathered serpent, that lives in that water. And I don't remember if it's men or women. One or the other isn't supposed to swim in the water. And it's just generally not a good place to be hanging out. I have to kind of agree with them because I keep remembering that night. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. But I felt this really huge menace was lurking and looking at me. To the point that I never went there again. And I used to go there 3 or 4 times a week, either to fish or to swim. I never went there again.
Right. I don't blame you. And that's the thing. I mean, just because we can't measure it in a test tube or we haven't absolutely confirmed something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, I'll give you for instance. Many people say the classic comeback for Bigfoot, for example. We're kind of hitting it all tonight, aren't we? We're doing cryptozoology, UFOs, ghosts, everything, and that's kind of the way I like it. I like a wide palette, and that's why we did that in this book. But people talk about Bigfoot. Well, why don't they ever find the carcass or the remains of a dead Bigfoot if there is, in fact, Bigfoot? And I'm not 100% sold on Bigfoot, but for the sake of argument and the sake of discussion, what about this? What if Bigfoot is not a being on our plane per se, but it's from another dimension? It's interdimensional. Then not find a carcass of it if it's popping in between dimensions. And I've had guests on the program, and these are not woo-woo kind of out there people. I've had physicists who said that it's almost a certainty that we do in fact live in a multiverse. So what if all these paranormal phenomena are not spirits or not aliens, but what if they're interdimensional travelers or manifestations? And that would account for a lot of their elusive and ephemeral nature. Just food for thought, adding more questions into our big stew of questions.
Yeah, I've often dwelled on the Bigfoot thing. I've had a few incidents, especially when I'm camping in Florida, that made me question whether or not we hadn't had some big-footed visitors besides my fiance. But we're really, we did question whether or not something else was out there. I'm always making fun of him. He has very large feet, wears like size 14 extra wide shoes, so it's like there to be made fun of, right?
Yep.
But anyhow, the whole thing is that I did some personal experiences that made me say, well, maybe. When I have Red Dog with me, because this is a dog that's been trained specifically for camping and hiking, and I'm questioning whether there's something out there watching us, and she's giving a low warning growl, but doesn't move from my side.
Right.
Then I say, well, because she's not really being afraid, but she's certainly not willing to push the issue either.
Right.
She's just letting something out there know that she knows it's there, and she's not real pleased with it, and so forth and so on. And I've talked to a number of other very serious what I would call science-based researchers in the topic. And they're firmly convinced of their existence, too. As for the reason why we don't find corpses, corpses aren't real easy to find, especially for a reclusive species. How hard we would look for winter-killed elk. And elk are a herding species. And, some years we didn't find any at all. And the reason we would hunt for winter-killed elk, for people who are not familiar, elk are the only species native to North America where you can also obtain legal ivory. They have an atrophied tusk in their upper jaw. And so if you find a winter-killed elk, you look to take the ivory out. And it's a good-sized little piece. You can make a piece of jewelry with it. And that was something that I used to do with the kids, and maybe we'd find it, maybe we wouldn't. It was like a treasure hunt. We're looking for the dead elk out here, kids. One that died 6 months ago. Yeah. But that was something we did. We looked for antlers and for the winter kill elk, and it was just, a fun thing to do in the spring, I guess.
No, I know what you're saying about not being able to find a carcass because many species will, drag away their dead. And sensibly, if there were a Bigfoot, it would probably be a primate that would be fairly, if you look at it on the chain of species. So therefore, chances are good that it would drag away its dead. So even if it were on this plane, it would be difficult to find. Now, I do think, and this is kind of a shame, I do think there's a ton of hoaxes out there. So, some of the YouTube videos that are purported to be Bigfoot are absolutely ridiculous. Same with UFOs. So, the beauty of
I have to admit, I'm really disappointed when I'm shown photographs of either aliens or Bigfoot. They seem to be the two things. But I've also been shown photos of angels and fairies. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking and I'm trying to see the angel, fairy, UFO, alien, whatever I'm supposed to find in the picture, and I'm not seeing it. And so the picture taker, or the person who has a picture, points to a spot in the picture and says, "It's right here, you have to use your imagination." Now that disappoints me immensely. Because you can take a picture of me. You don't have to use your imagination. I'm there in 3D.
No, you're right, and we do a lot of video that we review for UFOs for Paranormal Report, and there are some extraordinary ones. But I guess there's a blessing and a curse. Today, everybody has a pretty decent at all times. These days, a lot of people, probably over half the population, has a camera with them at all times in terms of cell phone, and many of them have HD video capability. So that's the good thing, but the bad thing is everybody's got a camera too. So I think there is, again, if 99% of UFO and ghost and cryptid video and photos are faked and 1%'s real, well, 1% might not seem like much, but that would translate to thousands of real sightings. So I don't think you could throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there is probably some legitimate ghost photography. There's some legitimate UFO photography, and possibly some legitimate cryptid photography. But the problem is it's so difficult these days to separate the wheat from the chaff because there's so much out there.
Yeah, I have to admit, in my case, I'm not going to be inclined to put a whole lot of credibility in a photograph unless I know the photographer personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I talked about the photograph from the Birdcage Theater. Well, I know the photographer. I know she's not going to do a hoax. Right. I know I took the photographs that I put up there, and I know that I didn't do anything to hoax them. So, I guess I'm probably the worst skeptic because almost nobody is going to be able to convince me that it wasn't unless, they've got like third party and, written and signed certified documents, and I'm going to be hard to convince.
But I think that's okay. I do have a campfire tale. It's not in the book, but it may be in a future one, about a picture. And it's not about a picture that was taken, but a picture that had odd behavior. And I'm going to paraphrase because this is not in the book, and I haven't heard the story for a while, so if I deviate slightly, please forgive me if anybody's listening who heard the actual story told. And again, this one's good enough it may end up in a Campfire 2 or a Campfire 3. There was a family member who had a family portrait, and they had it hanging on the wall. And it had, I don't know, 10 or 15 members of the family in it. And the person hanging the wall, I think it was an aunt of the caller, I can't remember, noticed that every once in a while, every couple months or something, it would fall off the wall. Happened once, and she put it up on the wall. Happened another time. She's like, that shouldn't do that. That's hung sturdily. Why does that keep falling? I think it did it something like a third or fourth time, and then she realized every time that family portrait fell off the wall, somebody in that picture died. Needless to say, she ended up putting the picture on a shelf. So, you wonder sometimes about, the power of photography, and even though it's rife with hoaxes and people maybe seeing what they want to see, they want that orb to be their late spouse. I think there is some power there and some ability, and that even brings up the question of something else that we cover on the Campfire regularly, is the question of EVP. I mean, where do you come down on EVP, Gia?
Well, I don't know. It's just like digital photography. Okay, remember when it first started, cameras were low resolution and incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Then we got the first webcams, and cameras weren't coming down much in price. They were still pretty low resolution. Well, during that time period, the same time period that my son had died, and I don't know if the two events had anything to do with each other, but after his death, I actually got so that I would not let anybody take a digital photograph of me. Because I went through a period of time where no matter where I was, who took the picture, something else would be in the picture with me. He didn't look like him at all, so I don't think it was him. Like I said, I'm not sure the two events really had anything to do with each other, other than maybe it bothered me more than it would have otherwise. There was also, my first husband had the webcam on and was recording it, and I had walked behind him to go to another part of the house, and this shadowy thing had followed me behind him. Right behind him as I walked. It was like 2 or 3 feet behind me. And like later that same week, he'd taken a picture of me in the kitchen, and I was like making pie crust or bread or something like that. That was the actual final straw, because in that picture I wasn't even recognizable. Where my face and upper torso should have been was an indistinct face, but someone with long black hair, and what looked to be a red feather hanging down on the one. It didn't even look like me. I mean, my hair was nowhere that long, and my hair's not black, never was. And I certainly didn't have a feather in my hair. And, it like creeped me out, totally creeped me out. I said, that's it. Nobody was allowed to take a digital photograph of me for quite some time. And, it really did bother me, because not one of the pictures showed me alone, ever. There was always something weird going on, and it started to really, because people started commenting, and it really started to bother me. And maybe I was more susceptible to being bothered because of the fact that I was still in a pretty intense grieving pattern then. And I just absolutely refused. Just no way. Now nothing weird happens. I use a digital camera all the time. Now I'm usually behind the camera, but, even when people take pictures, nothing weird happens. Is it a change in the resolution? Maybe. I've been told low-resolution cameras work better for capturing ghosts. I don't know.
That's interesting. I have seen photos that look very convincing now that the issue is, in this day and age, again, the blessing and the curse, right? We have such great technology, but we also have such great technology to fake things. So
right.
I'm almost skeptical of anything unless it's been vetted by a photographic expert. and sometimes it's even hard for them to tell. So I am interested in seeing UFO video, and some of it is just so, or video of cryptids or video of ghosts. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and some of it's just obviously fake, but it's becoming easier and easier to make convincing fake. So I kind of fall back to my one of my favorite sayings. I think we need to keep an open mind, but not so open that our brains fall out. And,
exactly, and I do believe a lot of the credibility of the photograph or film depends on the person that took it and is presenting it to me.
Sure.
You know, if I don't know them, then, you know, I'm going to need to verify this somehow. If I do know them, that goes a long ways. With some people, I'll admit, some people I still would kind of go, I don't know what you do. Because some people do think pull the wool over your eyes, too.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from, having that skeptical nature, and I just think that's why somebody asked me the question in an interview recently. You know, am I ever going to get tired of this? And I mean, of course, you like to do different things on my plus club, my bonus shows that I do for, you know, folks that want to subscribe to those, and those are the only shows that cost anything. The vast majority are absolutely free, but I do a true crime podcast because it is kind of fun to do something different. But I cannot see a time when I won't be, as long as I'm, you know, upright and have a pulse, not being interested in this topic, because it deals with all of the timeless questions. Is there a God? Why are we here? Do we live? And we haven't even touched life after death, which is something we do talk about in the book, After Death Communications. We have some great stories of, including me, of people who believe that
that's something that's so common. So many people have had experiences at which either were a dream-like state or they were actually awake and communicated with somebody who had already passed away, who saw them appear at the foot of their bed, or whatever.
Right. And it does not have to be. I mean, after death, I did a really, I thought, interesting show with PMH Atwater, who's a near-death...
She's a fascinating lady.
She's a researcher, and I believe we talked about different forms of after-death communications. I believe it was with her, although I did also interview Alan Botkin, who's done a lot of work with the psychomantium and similar type things. But so it's one of the two. But there are different, I believe she categorized different levels of after-death communications. And some of them are like, hi, I'm here. Others are phone calls. Others are things that happen to me that are almost weird coincidences, almost like the late person is using something else to communicate a message. So having an after-death communication does not just mean a ghost coming up and saying, hi, I'm here. There's all kinds of things. One of my favorite stories, and this is another one, and this, I like to give a flavor of the book. Obviously, I want people to check out Jim Harold's Campfire True Ghost Stories, see how I slipped that in. I thought that was good. But to give you a flavor, one story that we recently had on the show, and this will probably, again, be in a Campfire 2 or 3, we had a gentleman who, I believe he worked on a construction site. He had a radio. And that radio... So I think it was like one of those combo jobs as a flashlight or whatever. And so he brought it home and he had it on the counter. And all of a sudden it started playing. And what was interesting is that it had been sitting there and he and his wife had been talking. And they'd actually been talking about his late sister. And all of a sudden the radio perks for life and comes on. And there's the song So Far Away by Carole King, that great singer-songwriter, if many of your listeners are familiar with her. And the thing was is that they were talking about her sister, who happened to be a musician, whose favorite artist used to be Carole King, and whose favorite song was So Far Away. And just think about the implications of that title, So Far Away. To me, that's an after-death communication. Why, how that happened, I don't know, and the story I have is very much along that line of my late brother, but in the book. But I can't explain it, and I don't think I'll ever be able to explain it. But I think it was real. I think it happened. I think it was my brother trying to talk to me, and I think that was his sister trying to talk to him.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think back even when I had lost my son, obviously there was a period of very, very intense grief.
Of course. And
I had a dream in which I was at like a large family barbecue, and everybody was there, including people that had long since died. And the longer ago they died, especially the ones that died long before I was born, it was like their faces were smudged out, but they were all having a good time at this big table. And I was on the porch, and I fixed a plate of food for my son. And when he came and got it, I was very concerned because he was starting to decay around his eyes and lips and stuff. And I was very concerned. And my grandmother was right there, and she had also passed away before my son had. And she looked like she did when I was a teenager, not like she did in her later years, when I was young. Right. And she was standing there, and she said, you've got to quit doing this and let him go, or he's going to keep rotting. And I woke up then, and it was like, yeah, I think it's time I, really start letting go. And, for me, it made a difference. Was it actually from her, or was it from my subconscious? You can debate that till we're blue in the face. I feel it came from her. This was a way of her illustrating that it was time.
Yep.
And it was quite graphic and really got my attention,
And I think that, the dream state is an interesting state, and I know that we're getting in on time here, but we have stories in the book, the Campfire book, about people who had very vivid dreams that had great implication in their real life, whether it was a loved one or possibly a premonition or a warning of something. One from England, I won't spoil it, but just tremendous, the one about the candy, if you remember that one. And just tremendous, the weird coincidence that this person had, just unbelievable, and it almost had to be supernatural because it was too specific and it was too direct. And I absolutely believe that that was something tied into some kind of universal consciousness or something that communicated that message to that person. And the best way to find it is to again, check out Jim Harold's Campfire True Ghost Stories.
Yes, and your website is?
My website is jimharold.com. It's JIMHAROLD.com. The best thing is that if you go to that site, you don't have to buy a thing. Of course, I'd love it if you buy the book. But if you want to check out some of my podcasts, there's, I think, over 350 of them there now, absolutely free. And you can go to the red button on the right hand, say listen and watch, and you'll be directed to a page where you can access all the archives. And you can enjoy, and I would appreciate it if you come check those out. You can find them on iTunes as well. But start at jimharold.com, and it'll all become clear what it is that we do. And I certainly hope your listeners will check out Jim Harold's Campfire True Ghost Stories. It's at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, JimHarold.com, and at fine bookstores everywhere. In fact, one of my very kind listeners Facebooked a picture of it in the Barnes & Noble 5th Avenue in New York City. So that was a thrill to see that right next to Hans Holzer books. So I'm walking in tall cotton now. We're on the shelf next to Hans Holzer.
Yeah. Well, it has been really, really great talking with you tonight, and I have absolutely had a ball. Like I said, this book came in the mail. I'd actually been out of town due to a family illness for over a week, and so when I came back home, this book was waiting for me with my mail. And when I unwrapped it, I went, ooh, Campfire, True Ghost Stories. Okay, we got to read this one. Yours got the first reading out of the whole bunch, because I actually had a stack of them. And it was like, I like that. And I was glad that I was able to get you on, and so forth and so on so quickly, especially with your book coming out this week. and folks, it is really, really a neat book. It's the perfect book for people who have no time because, there again, each chapter is a standalone title. I hear that so often. Oh, I don't have time to read a book. Well, when you can pick up a book and you can read for, a couple of minutes and get the whole story,
I hate to say it,
forget.
I hate to say it, but it's a great bathroom book.
Yeah, you're right in that too. You're right in that too. So yeah, folks, if you're looking for a new bathroom book, yep, Jim Harold's Campfire Truth Ghost Stories. And hopefully don't run out of toilet paper and decide to use a book because it won't be real nice. Paper's a little heavy duty for that. Yeah, but it is a great book if you're looking for stories to tell, to read to people. They're short, they're sweet, and they're interesting. But we have run out of time again. Jim, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight and being such a wonderful guest.
Oh, thank you. It's great to make a new friend and to get to talk to all your listeners. Thank you so much, Jim. You have a delightful night and continued success.
Oh, thank you very much. Folks, I've enjoyed the program with Jim tonight, and I hope all of you have as well, and that you found it all. It provided all of you with plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal Lord's truth. Join us again next week, and we'll bring you along for another episode of The Dawn of Shades. And I know it's going to be another fascinating conversation as well, as we are going to be joined by Raven Calderon, the author of Moon Phase Astrology. With that, we are out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.
If this is how it goes,